Well, everybody, I know that some people are starting to roll in, and so you guys should be able to see on your screen that you are joining the webinar, How to Make Compelling Compliance Training Compelling. I'm wondering if there's anybody like, giving us the side eye, like, seriously? So pressure is going to be on, Tiffany. All right, so I am going to just continue to chat everybody up. I can see lots of people pouring in right now. So welcome everyone. We're super excited to talk to you about compliance training. I know we've heard a lot of noise and hot buttons on, now that compliance training is really ramping up. So super excited to be talking to everybody about that. So just to kind of remind everybody what we're covering today, our point of view is that we know the truth. Like, compliance training is not really something that employees often look forward to. And it's kind of that necessary evil. But we actually think, and we've got some tips and tricks. Tiffany has got some great insights about how to really get people to engage and how to really think differently about compliance training and make it something that is a vibrant addition to your learning and talent programs, and not just something that people are like drudgery, walking the plank to compliance training. So super excited. Okay, we are going to get going here, and we usually give people 2-3 minutes to get in. So to my attendees, welcome, the new ones in here. We're going to be talking about compliance training, and I want you guys to start, hitting up that chat button. So in the very bottom, I know that most of us are totally Zoom experts at this point. However, just humor me and click that chat button, and I would love to see, where you guys logging in from, like what state, what country, what city, where are you coming from? And since we can't see your beautiful smiling faces, I want to know what color shirt you're wearing. San Diego, hello, Nancy and Rob. Yes, DFW with us, absolutely. Oh, Nancy's in green. What a great spring color. Ray, what color are you wearing? In black. Yep. I'm with you. Absolutely. So Lisa from San Francisco, welcome. And Jenny, white sweats. Lisa, I'm totally #jelly of your outfit right now. I am not in sweats. That sounds marvelous. Pink in Michigan, Stacy, welcome. Dave, it's so good to see you. Thanks for joining. Rob in a gray sweatshirt, and Andrea in green. So everybody's taking a very different approach to this springtime thing. Snowy Ohio. Ooh, snow over there, huh? All right, so in just about 30 seconds, we're going to get going, and the spotlight will be on Tiffany to guide us through her compliance playbook, if you will, compliance engagement playbook. So you guys are awesome. Sheila, thank you so much. Chad, I really appreciate you guys. So I really encourage you. It's hard. You guys know this. It's hard to be on Zoom like this. So as we're talking, share your tips, share your questions, give Tiffany high fives in the chat or heckle her.
No,
sorry, not
no,
sorry.
Don't do that.
Well, maybe I will do that a little bit. No, but seriously, I mean, we want to see that engagement on there. We want to be able to talk to you guys about what you want to hear on this. If there are any specific questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom. So let's say if there's a question that you don't want to post in the chat, you can put it under the Q&A. We will be reading and looking at those as well. The only difference is that only the panelists can see them instead of in the chat. You can raise your hand, that kind of thing. So if anybody is, really feeling that, we've got that functionality sometimes, some of you, and really that's it. I mean, you guys, thank you so much. It's a huge gift that we are honored by when you give us your time and attention. And so we really want to make sure that we reward this. I am so glad you are the speaker, Tiffany. Okay, final tip. Tiffany is going to be sharing her screen, so it will automatically go into kind of a presenter mode, but just for a user experience reminder, up in the top corner, you should see a little view icon, and you can change that. And especially if there's anything that you really want to see, you can also go into full screen up there. So without further ado, Tiffany, I'm going to turn it over to you to share with us how to make compelling compliance training.
Perfect. First, let's see if I can actually share my screen without any issues. So,
always the big challenge.
All right.
Success. Over to you.
All right, I'll take it. So today we're going to talk about a little bit around compliance training, and I'm actually surprised at the amount of registrations we have for this webinar, because typically when people hear compliance training, they have a tendency to want to run or to avoid it altogether. So I'm very excited that we've got the attendance that we do today. I'm just going to start stepping into it. We have 3 key areas that we're going to hit on that I thought was valuable to what I hear clients or customers are experiencing, what I'm hearing from people who are in the compliance departments, what's happening in their organization. So first is, let's see if I can advance to the next slide. All right, there we go. We want to talk about how to build compliance engagement in the workforce. And for the purpose of this topic, it's not so much about the content piece itself, but how are we engaging the workforce and the individuals that need to take compliance. As part of this, one of the huge things, and I mentioned it before, I know that Dacia hit on it, is compliance is that thing that everybody dreads. It's not exciting. It's usually not something that advances your career. You typically aren't being advanced in your skills. It's usually something you already know and have to use on a day-to-day basis. So when the term compliance comes up for users or learners, there's a lot of, oh geez, not again, or it's that time of year. Or even in some organizations, it feels like it never stops. So if we're talking manufacturing and life sciences, a lot of times there's what I call read and acknowledges, but I've heard individuals call them bore and snores, where they're constantly coming in, and it's a constant thing that they've got to keep up with. And so I wanted to talk about a few ways that we can talk about not punishing for non-compliance. So organizations have a tendency to drive people to compliance, and when they didn't meet the compliance, there's a consequence. But really reinforce and reward people who are completing their training and the purpose and the need for the training. As part of this conversation, earlier this week and last week, I've been talking to one of my colleagues, Nancy, and she gave me some really great stories and examples of what some of her clients or friends are doing in the industry. And so I want to bring her on. I'm going to give our team behind the scenes a minute to bring her on as a panelist to be part of this conversation about how do we get past that, creating that cycle of dread, but really drive and motivate people around compliance training.
Okay, can you hear me, Tiffany?
I can, and I can see you. Thanks, Nancy.
Okay. Hey, thanks for letting me pop in. And I think there's a lot of monotony that happens here with compliance training. And I think what we've seen, particularly in our regulated industries with life sciences and healthcare, hospitals, airlines, financial, is that the compliance training tends to fall into different levels of immediacy. Which then if you're helping the employee understand that level of immediacy, it tends to help get over that whole bore and snore situation. So for instance, I'll pick on manufacturing. So one of our life sciences clients, they have a lot of manufacturing compliance that happens over and over, of course. And so what they did is they incentivized the employees to be really proactive, and they gave them a merit increase in their performance review if they were proactive with that. And what helped them become more proactive is that the staff understood which were the compliance courses that were absolutely immediate. If they don't do it this week, it's going to stop business. Then which are the ones that you have to do, but it wasn't immediate, needed to be done this week. and then which were the annual compliance that they had a little bit longer leeway to do and they might have forgotten. So once they identified that, that really helped the employee have more proactivity, which then flipped the model a little bit, rather than, like you said, Tiffany, rather than reprimanding, it went to reward.
Sure. So in what you're saying is they actually took this thing that is a necessary evil and they were able to tie it to their talent management cycle and provide a merit increase. One thing though I want to talk about, it wasn't just about completing the training, it was about completing it early, right?
Yeah.
When we talked about this, that's kind of big, because what I know a lot of organizations do, they say, okay, here's your training, it's due in 30 days or it's due in 14 days. Typically, you have two types of people. You have the person who says, oh my gosh, I have something on my to-do list, I've got to get it completed. And you have the other type, which is a little, I would say probably the majority of adult learners of, great, 29 more days until I got to think about that. And so people were really finishing this critical compliance training last minute. But what you explained to me happened in this client. Can you tell me what changed as far as their behavior?
Yeah. Repeat that. I'm sorry.
Can you tell me what changed as far as the behavior with the compliance training?
So the change, what the change occurred is because they were really upfront and transparent with the employees as to how to divide and compartmentalize the need for the different courses, rather than here are the 50 that have to be done.
Sure.
It was, here are the ones that are most important, most critical for you particularly, and for our business. And the management there really took a different approach and really spent some time and divided that up to be able to then relay that to the employees. That was the biggest change.
Perfect. So a few other things. So I personally, given what we do around the life cycle of employees and talent management, I love that they tied that into their talent management cycle. I know from different size and different complexities of organizations, not everybody can give merit increases for the compliance training that's a necessary evil. What are some other ways that you've seen organizations try to bring some reward to positive behavior when it comes to compliance training that might not necessarily be merit increases?
So there's a couple things. There's additional time off. There is, if they're going into the facility, in this particular case, these are essential workers through the pandemic. So they were given preferential parking, not that that's a big deal this second because not everybody's there. But the other thing they do is they give chips. And then you can turn in the chips for lunches and items in the company store, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I see the company store item quite often. Believe it or not, people like swag. That's why we go to conferences, right? It's not really the conference. We want to know what we're getting out of it. So those are a few different ways on how you can reward, but there's a little bit more to the conversation that we want to dive into. And for me, it's really organizations I've worked with, I've seen some underestimation of the impact of change management, or even let's just say communication planning around rollout. You and I talked a lot about this as well over the last couple of weeks. And it's really, really important for people to know what's coming, why they have to complete it, especially adult learners. Actually understanding why and how is it personal to them is a huge motivator. And in fact, if you're not giving them that, you haven't caught their attention yet enough, and you've just given them one more to-do thing on a list of to-dos that they have to get done. So the change management and the communication around this is huge. I think part of this is what you talked about, prioritizing the training, right? What's your high priority? This is business critical. Also, you can't do your job if you haven't completed this training. We're talking about healthcare workers. There's certain compliance training they have to complete before they interact with patients. Those are Those are mission critical, business critical. And then you talked about that kind of middle level. It's not, it doesn't have to be done now. Some of it for organizations I've worked with are kind of like that continuing education, right? I got my certification. I just got it over the next quarter or the next 12 months. I've got to keep the training going. And then that last thing is that annual compliance, which is often global or across the whole department. But really including that as part of your change management or your communication plan makes an impact to your learners or your individuals. What else in the change management piece of this, Nancy, would you say is critical to highlight?
I think one of the other things that's really important is to really enable the training and development staff to take the time to look into the various categories of their compliance training and give them the tools to really break down reports and really think about this as a change management concept. One of the hospitals that we're currently working with, their biggest issue and the reason they came to us is that they had mission critical certifications for healthcare professionals as they're changing departments. And of course, in the pandemic, these healthcare professionals are being pulled in all different directions throughout the hospital. But half of the certifications or the reports are manual, some are in a system. And so being proactive and thinking ahead and giving that training and development staff time to really think about that. Okay, now that we've gone through or we're hopefully ending a pandemic, what lessons did we learn? How did we have to move people around? This happens in manufacturing, it happens in airline, financial situations as well, but it was really critical for this hospital. So the solution for them was to figure out a way that they could really look at a unified reporting structure and to have all the certifications feed into one piece. So even though this is clearly about compliance, the solution may not be the compliance training. Mm-hmm. It could be how can you access that data and information?
Right. And, one of the things that motivate learners, again, going back to that, because these are the people that you depend on to complete the training so your business continues forward and so that, you don't have regulatory fines. But one of the things that motivate them are understanding progress. And I think it's really important to note it's not just their progress, it's their department's progress, their team's progress, the organization's progress. So that reporting that you're talking about, Nancy, it plays right into something we'll talk a little bit later, but having that real-time information kind of gives that scoreboard. How are we doing? Are we winning or are we losing? Because that's a big deal for many adults in the workforce. Are we winning or are we losing?
And knowing and
he's motivated by winning.
Absolutely. And knowing where you stand, that's why we all get excited about sports and, all of the brackets and all of that. It's knowing where you stand. And for those training and development managers and those HR directors, knowing where everybody is in the process is a proactive way to enable the business to respond to these situations that come up, and they always come up.
They always come up. Glad you mentioned that, because the other thing that we talked about when it comes to creating that workforce engagement is highlighting areas to focus. So we talked about prioritizing the training, but anytime that we can connect something to our real world experience, our day-to-day life, it sticks more. It actually creates a memory. And when there's a memory, it's retained in your brain. So as part of this is highlight the areas where it connects to a real world scenario or an event or an issue that you're dealing with inside the organization. Nancy, when we talked about this, you brought back the 183 days since our accident or whatever, as far as the OSHA safety counter. What are the things that when you're telling people, I know you have loads of training, you need to take it, but here's where I need you to focus because this is where we're facing an issue inside of the business, or this is where without it, we could face a risk or an impact. To me, this plays to that risk versus reward and kind of drives the motivation in that direction.
Absolutely. And yeah, it also gets at, Tiffany, the type, like you had mentioned, the type of employee, what motivates them, of course, but also if are they invested? If you're breaking down your compliance training in buckets that are manageable and that an employee can really attach themselves to and feel accountable, it's really giving them accountability. It also can flesh out a little bit of where your employees stand in an entire field of quote unquote like manufacturing or healthcare professionals. There's always subdivisions within that. So again, it can go back to your original point and tie it to talent, your talent development and your talent management goals.
Perfect. So those are our thoughts, our tips, our examples of what we see our clients doing or our friends in the industry doing around how to, create that engaging workforce. The next thing I want to talk about is, maybe I should have led with this. We all know it's seen as boring, but what can we do about it? A couple of years ago, I had an interesting experience. We were working with a client. We had a large 2-day workshop where they brought their field employees in to have the conversations as we were getting ready to support them in their LMS. And it was really great to have a nothing held back conversation with the field employees. These are the guys that are out there day by day. They don't sit for this particular client is manufacturing. They don't sit at computers. So they can't just say, oh, I got 15 minutes. Let me run through that course. And what they were asking for from that vendor. In fact, the most compelling thing that happened is one of the guys goes, look, I've been doing this for 23 years. I appreciate you bring us in once a quarter for a full day or 2 days so that we can knock it all out. But Lord, it is boring. Can you do anything else but show me the same PowerPoint? They are begging for something else in the training. They've seen the training every year for 23, that guy for 23 years. They know what's being asked of them. They do this on a day-to-day. You're not typically teaching them something new. So what is it that we can do? And when we start this conversation, all kinds of big ideas start going out. And then for L&D departments or the compliance department, it starts to sound really big. And the budget a lot of times isn't as big as the grand plans are, right? So I want to start with making adjustments and changing the way that training feels. Does not mean you have to go blow your entire budget and go recreate everything. There's small things that we can do. And I know we, in the training environment, we talk a lot about, best practices, micro learning, chunk it up, smaller intervals. And it's probably something that's said over and over again. Yet I work with clients and we start loading their content or we go through UAT. They know that's what they need to do, but they're not doing that. So I want to reiterate that starting small, you don't have to go recreate everything. Chunking up your training, starting to create or provide scenarios where when you're in that via that virtual learning or you're in that instructor class, because some people are still doing instructor class training, creating those scenarios for them to take and transfer that learning to a real world scenario, something they're really going to face on the job. Or even give your team members that have been there for a longer period of time opportunity to talk about some of their experience or tell their stories or how they've overcome things. And the other thing, which I just actually recorded on a podcast that should be coming out soon, is about the accessibility to the training. It is, it's easy when you typically have a corporate environment and you sit at a computer every day. Accessibility doesn't really come to mind as the most important thing, but you have to remember in the heavily regulated industries, often they're not sitting at their own computer. They may have access to a kiosk. They may be out on a manufacturing floor or in the emergency room in a hospital. So how do we make it easy for people to access their training and in a way that they can quickly move through it. Think about if I'm at a kiosk, I only got 15 minutes. I need to be able to log in, grab something, take a few minutes of training, and then go back to work. Nancy, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Yeah. Thank you, Tiffany. I think that the accessibility is a big point. I mean, that gets back to our basic, when you're creating courses, you're always, creating for your particular audience. So obviously mobile learning and all of that, shared your retail, and you have point of service employees that all are sharing a computer. You have to have accessibility. The one thing that I wanted to add about that is when you were talking about chunking it up. Now, these aren't any new concepts whatsoever, but what we wanted to just reinforce is that prioritizing. So when you're looking at your budget, really looking at, well, which of the courses, if we made a change, could have the biggest impact. One of the courses that we were involved with was with an airline, so very obviously regulated industry, lot of safety and injury reports coming from one particular type of procedure. And once we narrowed down that procedure, we were able to help create a really nice scenario-based e-learning. It wasn't long, and it had animation, and you actually had to go through the application a number of times to make sure you were doing a particular guardrail in the right way to not pinch or cut or injure fingers. And after looking at that and obviously rolling it out, that particular pain point, literally that pain point was decreased as far as injury reports. So not only prioritizing the type of compliance, but within that, looking at the pieces that could have the biggest impact. So maybe you can only spend on one or two. Find the ones that will have the biggest impact. Really take the time to look at that.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more. So that brings us into the next part of the conversation. So right now we're talking about not blowing your budget, but look, a lot of things have changed over the last year. The way that we work together, the access we have, where we're working, all that has changed. Our compliance requirements are changing, right? Out of the moving into hopefully pretty close or trending towards a post-COVID world. There's new compliance that we have in all engaging with how we engage with people, et cetera. So there's not only what you already had, there's the compliance now that you're rolling out and you're going to be bringing stuff on over the next year. And so typically, and what I've heard from some clients is, okay, well, turns out our budget is adjusted this year because we know because of the changes that the past year has pushed into our workforce, we have some more budget around our compliance training and what we can do because we have to make adjustments. Some clients have talked to me or mentioned to me, hey, what about virtual reality or augmented reality? They're really cool ideas or thoughts. They're in the marketplace. You're seeing it. It really brings that kind of game feel. But there's some times where it makes sense to maybe explore that. And this isn't a right size, right answer for everything. So Nancy, in your experience, what do you think is the right time to maybe investigate virtual or augmented reality options?
Well, it's when you have a large group of your audience. It could even be your customer training on a particular product that you're selling. But when you have a large audience and there's going to be little change, and primarily under product application and product and product use. So for instance, there is a fairly large life sciences and diagnostics company that we work with, and they sell capital equipment to hospitals. Well, these pieces of equipment don't necessarily change. The software within them and various features may, but they've invested in some augmented reality in order to not only train their customers, but to train their sales staff and the customer service reps. So they were able to hit 3 different audience groups, and it's all required training. So it made a lot of sense to look at that investment and to really think about, well, what parts, what, and literally it's equipment. So then which pieces have the most frequent questions or complications? Also, that expanded to their techs in the field. So it hit a lot of, it just made sense to invest because it hit a lot of people, including their customers. Any kind of training that's required that's going to hit a customer, that's usually going to drive the need to look at it more closely and
So
spend money on it, you know.
Right. And again, with those, if you're going to invest in something, you want something that's not going to be changing on a regular basis, because they're not exactly what you would call inexpensive to create those type of courses. Nancy, we got a couple of questions that are coming in, and I have some ideas. I think you probably have some ideas too, but really around, okay, we've talked about compliance, we've talked about that engagement, but how do we keep the annual training? How do we keep it from being the same old stuff over and over, year after year? I think some of these ideas apply. I think, a blended approach to learning is something that I've been seeing is kind of a recommended approach for adult learners too. They don't want to just sit at the computer. They don't want to just sit in a classroom. There's this, and they've got to make time for it piece, right? Oh gosh, I got to stop what I'm doing because that annual training is coming, and dang it, I only got 10 days left, whatnot. For me, a few things that I've seen from people or from clients is really, how do we not just take it and put it in a curriculum and say, complete this, but where's the live interaction? And it doesn't have to be an in-classroom training. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, how do you take what you learned or what you picked up in that annual training and go apply it? Or how do you bring it into a cohort so that there's collaboration around it, that it's not just an individual sitting there running through the same courses that you had last year, but creating some discussion and some engagement specifically around that training. Nancy, do you have any other items outside of just recreating the content every year?
Right. And that's a really good point, Tiffany. You don't necessarily have to recreate it, although it would be nice to refresh, of course, sure, and break it down. But if you don't have that ability or that resource, Tiffany, you hit on it. What we're seeing is there's so many great new social learning features that can be implemented in your LMS, and you could actually recreate a curriculum or create a cohort within your learning platform that actually allows for engagement and application. So one example is one of the courses that we recently worked on. It was annual training, and what we did is we broke it down into chunks of people. So the roles, so everybody on your team that had to take that. And then the training manager asked certain questions as to, how did you apply this? What would you do different? And created this dialogue. And so that ended up to be part of the requirement of not only watching it, answer the questions, see if you can apply it, and then they were able to move on to the next. Now, it's not feasible when you've got 60 of these to do every year, but you can, again, prioritize and pick those. And the things that we're seeing that you're able to do now with social learning, it cuts down on the need for you to have to recreate. It's just really thinking outside of the box.
Perfect. There's a couple more. I've seen comments when I mentioned about additional budget because of compliance changes. I am aware that some organizations have no new budget. are you kidding me? They're cutting my budget. Where am I getting new budget? And so I want to highlight on some of those, taking a look at, if you've got a current LMS, taking a look at what have they brought into the system? What are the features and functions that are available now? An LMS or an LXP, let's say, I don't know what you have, but what's available now that you might not be leveraging, which is no cost or budget for you. It's something that's already there that you might be able to pick up and create some of these more engaging aspects to the training, just like you said, some of the social learning pieces, et cetera. So I do understand you might be trying to solve compliance with no money. Let's start with what you've got, but you're not using. So it's kind of like going out to the garage and going back through the toolboxes. What do you have in the back drawer that you totally forgot about, or you were unaware of what its intended purpose was? So that's some ways to kind of find different ways to make an impact.
Make an impact. Yeah. The other thing too, Tiffany, I see we got a question, and it's a really valid question about adding some of these social learning aspects to the training. Mm-hmm. It's a really good way to do it. But if you don't have resources, what do you do? And I think it gets back to prioritizing and whether or not the particular training is going to impact your outcome. And so is there somebody on the training team that can help monitor that discussion board?
Wonderful. And also, as part of your cohorts, can you identify a SME in your cohort, somebody that's part of the group going through it, and give them that additional
absolutely
of,
absolutely, and push back to the business if it's their required training. So perhaps we always utilize SMEs whenever we're creating custom content for a customer, and it doesn't take a long time, and but their manager can also be invested in this as well, as long as, getting back to the original point, as long as that particular annual training is tied to a very real priority.
Perfect. I like it. So the next thing I want to talk about is what role gamification can play in the process. Over the last couple of years, there's kind of a mixed emotion around gamification. I'd like to, if you notice on your screens, a poll question should have come up for you. I'd like to, hear from you. Are you using or incorporating gamification in your current compliance training? And just for purposes of this call, say compliance or annual training. If you're not, or is it something, yes, but you haven't got to dip into that yet, and you're looking for some tips and tricks. You guys could just take a minute to answer the poll as we jump into this portion of the conversation. While you guys are doing that, I'm just going to jump in a little bit, and we'll talk about the results a little bit in a few minutes, should I say. So in working with clients and L&D leaders, I've heard mixed emotions. And here's the thing, when I bring up gamification, I'm not asking you to give your employees prizes, or I've heard a client say, well, we're not really into giving McDonald's toys at the end of training. That's not what it's about. In fact, if anybody here is a parent, the last thing you want is another McDonald's toy. The other thing for me is don't make it fluffy. Yeah. There are gamification design features, but let's bring it bigger. Why are we talking about bringing gamification into training? And here's why. It becomes an emotional motivator. Again, you want to tap into that personal, emotional side of your learners. You want to drive them forward. Many adults are competitive. We talked about, winning as a motivator, or knowing if you're winning or losing has an impact. Adults also, because we're adults, right? We get to make our own choices now. We want to learn by exploring. Studies have shown that we're not really motivated by clicking through and just following the step-by-step directions. We want to kind of explore it, learn on our own a little bit, and then see where we are making progress. So there's a few things to talk about And I know when I say gamification, typically the first thing that comes to mind is badges and points. Well, yes, they can be part of gamification. That is a gamification design idea. And it does have a purpose and it does have an impact, but it can be more than that. You know, we can even talk about when you're doing your annual training, really bringing in games into the conversation. Nancy, you talked about a client who plays Jeopardy around their compliance training, right? It seems small, or in some people they're like, yeah, but this is compliance. It's not time for fun and games. I would challenge you to say, actually, you should bring some fun into it if you want people to engage and retain and apply the information you're trying to give them. There are studies that show that when gamification is brought into the training or into your training approach, that there's actually a higher retention rate, specifically in newer people who are newer to the subject matter. There's a higher retention rate. So it's actually changing the behavior because you're giving them a different way to consume the information. You're not throwing up the same PowerPoint that I already know is 10 slides. I know what's on the third slide and it's a really outdated page. And I've already quit listening because I've seen this PowerPoint before. Instead, you're giving them something to engage and immerse themselves into. That connects to a different area of the brain, which then creates, like I said earlier, it creates memories. It sticks and makes it a sticky experience. Nancy, do you have any thoughts or things you want to add around the gamification piece?
Well, I think it gets back to, obviously, as learning and development professionals, we would love to spend a lot of time and gamify every single training, or ones that we really, like you said, are emotionally motivated. But again, we don't have budgets. We don't, unlimited resources to do this. So the coaching that we do with our clients and the consulting around this is to really look at those courses that are going to make the biggest impact for your ratings or your auditing, or where you're having the issues inside the organization. So it goes back to that example that I was describing about the airline and having the injury reports. And there's a lot of others like that. And if you think about it as well, for any type of sales training or onboarding training, even though it's compliance, everybody has to go through this. If there are ways to just break it up, and it doesn't have to be exorbitant in resources, but just break it up and then ask questions so that you're actually breaking up the content for that scenario-based learning. We've done courses where you've just had small amounts of information relayed, compliance information. Then you're asked to go back, work with your team, figure out the right answer, and then come back to the training. So that gets you emotionally motivated. And then at the end, of course, your team is scored against the other teams that are all taking these courses. So that's the form of gamification without making it fluffy or a Jeopardy game. But it's also looking at, what is the impact of this compliance training? Do I have to just click through this in 20 minutes? Or can I look at it for 5 minutes, go back to my team in my team meeting tomorrow, have a discussion, then come back the next day and actually add a response to it in a free form box? Mm-hmm. That didn't really even add a whole lot of cost, but where it adds is you have to, you think ahead of time, which courses need to have better impact and how you're going to plan that out.
Sure. So I've got the results from our poll, and I just want to point out that of the participants on this call, only 25% actually use gamification now as in conjunction with their compliance or annual training. So there's ways that you can bring gamification elements into your training without going and creating a custom e-learning course with branching and maps and journey maps. Well, those are great. And if you can do that, yes, they're beneficial and they do have an impact. But I don't want to, you know, a saying I learned a long time ago is there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that's one bite at a time. You can't change it all at once. And so what is the little bites that you can take that will have an impact to your learners specifically? And, you know, a couple of things that I've mentioned before is compliance training, annual training is not typically a new skill somebody is learning to move their career forward. It's typically not something that is even tied to pay increases, unless you found a way to do that, like some of our clients have done. And so you have to find some way to make it important, or at least create an emotional engagement with it so that you can have a different reaction from your learners. And ultimately what you want them to do is pick up behaviors that turn into habits for your organization. And the repetition and the reward and the value in it are ways that have been proven to change behaviors in adult learners. Nancy, thanks so much for joining the conversation with me today and helping me with the stories and examples you've had with your clients. I appreciate everybody on all of our participants. Dacia, I may be stealing your thunder, so if you have anything to add, let me know.
I will just add one thing. We are going to be sending out these slides in our standard follow-up, so you'll get them. But the other cool thing is that Tiffany actually had a deep kind of behind the curtain conversation around this on our podcast. And so in that email, you guys are going to be getting a link to the blog that covered that, as well as the video that went into even additional aspects, beyond what Tiffany and Nancy talked about today. So lots and lots of resources coming your way, and continue to hit us up with questions. And obviously, please reach out directly to Tiffany. So thank you both, ladies. That's all I have to add.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, have an amazing, prosperous, and wonderful rest of your week. And thank you so much for your work in helping your folks to reach their potential and to protect your company's integrity in this compliance training. You are the best, and we are honored to be able to support you. Onward and upward, you guys. Bye-bye.